Right. Picture this. You're in New York City. It's the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
And there are these parties erupting in the most unexpected places. I mean, think McDonald's.
McDonald's.
Yeah, McDonald's. And the costumes, they're incredible. This crazy fusion of drag and like childhood fantasy.
Blah.
Yeah. And at the center of it all is this like unbelievably charismatic ringleader, Michael Alig.
Oh, yeah. Michael Alig and the Club Kids.
That's right, the Club Kids. And that's what we're diving into today.
No, it's a wild one.
It is. It's a lot more than just a story about parties, though, right?
Absolutely.
It's about fame and excess and the dark side of subculture. And we've got biographical info, court records, firsthand accounts. We really dug deep on this one.
You have to. I mean, behind all the crazy stories and the sensationalism, you've got real people and complex social dynamics.
Exactly. And we're going to get to the tragic part of this story, too.
Right.
But, we're going beyond the headlines to really get to the nuances of it all.
Yeah, it's important to remember the backdrop here. New York in the late 80s, early 90s, it was a tough time. The AIDS epidemic, a lot of fear and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And the club scene, it became this refuge, a place for people to express themselves, find community. And Alig, he tapped right into that, amplified it even.
He did. So before he was this, king of the club scene, Ali was just this kid from Indiana.
Yeah, small town Indiana.
Yeah, good student. But even then, he always felt different, like he was searching for something more.
Well, there are stories about him being bullied, for his sexuality.
Really?
Yeah, and that might have fueled his need for a more accepting environment.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so New York City, it was like this escape for him.
It was. He went to Fordham University to study architecture, actually.
He did. Although architecture, I guess, it wasn't his true calling. He ended up switching to FIT, the Fashion Institute of Technology.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's where he really connected with the art world. Even someone linked to Keith Haring. So talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, that's when his fascination with nightlife really, took off. He dropped out of FIT, started working as a busboy at Danceteria.
Oh, wow. Danceteria. That's legendary. That's where he really learned the ropes.
It was.
Yeah, he understood, instinctively what would capture people's attention, how to push the boundaries. He was a natural at promotion, creating events.
Well, he wasn't just throwing parties, right? He was all about creating these, immersive experiences.
That's right.
And that's where the club kids come in.
Yeah, the club kids.
Outrageous outfits. Think, living, breathing art installations.
It was performance art meets nightlife.
It was.
Yeah.
Fueled by music and, let's be honest, a lot of drugs.
They were definitely fueled by something. It was a total rejection of the mainstream, you know? A visual, social commentary on the times.
Yeah.
And you had these figures like RuPaul, Amanda Lepore, James St. James, really leading the charge.
They were impossible to ignore. I mean, everyone was talking about them. Newsweek, Time Magazine, even Donahue.
Everyone wanted a piece of the club kids, but, they weren't just this little niche group. They tapped into something bigger, this desire for, self-expression, freedom from all the constraints of society.
Yeah. Yeah.
Their outrageousness. It was a rebellion.
It was. And Alig was the orchestrator, right?
He was.
He got a job at the Limelight, this club owned by Peter Gatien, and that's when things really exploded.
It's when Alig really came into his own.
His outlaw parties, they became legendary. They'd have them in the most random spots. McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts.
He'd just take over these everyday places and transform them.
Yeah.
It was surreal.
But his behavior, it was unpredictable.
Oh, yeah.
Shocking almost. He would throw money at people, do these crazy stunts.
He was later diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder.
Ah, okay.
Which, that often involves attention-seeking, dramatic behavior.
So it's like he was almost, calculated in a way.
In a way. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But underneath all that spectacle, things were getting pretty dark.
They were.
Alig's drug use was spiraling.
Right.
Rehab stints, tension with Peter Gatien. It all led to him getting fired from the Limelight.
And that's when things really take a tragic turn.
Yeah, that's when the story takes a dark turn.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, the club scene back then, especially New York, it was intertwined with drug culture.
Right.
Heroin, cocaine, it was everywhere.
Yeah.
The crack epidemic was ravaging the city. It was this backdrop of addiction and desperation.
Yeah.
And the lines between performance and reality, they got blurred. And for some people, that had devastating consequences. It was really easy to get caught up in it,
Right.
all the parties and the drugs.
Yeah, and it's against this backdrop that we have to talk about, the death of Angel Melendez.
Yeah, this is where things get really, really dark.
It does. So who was Angel Melendez?
Well, Angel was a club kid himself.
Yep.
He was dealing drugs at the Limelight, and for a while he was actually Alig's roommate.
Oh, wow. So Alig's already, spiraling, and then the Limelight gets shut down.
Right, by federal agents.
Yeah, because of all the drug activity.
Exactly. And Angel loses his job. Their, tensions are high.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's like a powder keg.
It really is.
And it all explodes on March 17th, 1996.
St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. There's this confrontation between Alig and Angel at their apartment.
Right.
And it ends with Angel's death.
This is the event that really overshadows everything else about Alig's story.
Yeah.
But, we have to understand the context.
Yeah.
The drug culture, the power dynamics. It's this mix of volatile personalities that ultimately leads to this tragedy.
It does. And the details of what happened that night?
They're still debated.
Right. We don't know exactly what happened, but...
But we do know that Alig and his roommate, Robert Freeze Riggs, were involved.
Right. And what happens next is just horrifying.
It is.
They try to hide Angel's body in the bathtub.
You're like, that's going to work.
Yeah. But then Riggs goes out and he buys these knives in a box.
Oh, God.
And in exchange for heroin, Alig agrees to help dismember the body.
This is just...
It's just chilling.
I mean, this act, it just shows how desensitized they had become,
Yeah.
It's just distorted reality fueled by all the drugs.
It's awful. And they dispose of the body parts in the Hudson River.
Jeez.
They're just desperate to cover up their crime. But in the weeks that follow, Alig starts confessing to people.
He does.
Almost like bragging about it.
Yeah, that fits with, the histrionic personality disorder we talked about.
Right.
And that need for attention, even if it's negative attention, it seemed to overwhelm him.
Yeah, and of course the drugs are still a factor.
Oh, absolutely.
They're still influencing his judgment, but at first everyone just dismisses his confessions as, just another one of his crazy attempts to shock people.
Right, because he had that reputation.
Exactly.
He was known for being outrageous.
Yeah. But there was this journalist, Michael Musto, who had been covering the club scene for years.
Oh, yeah. Musto, his column in the Village Voice was really influential.
Right, and he starts hearing these rumors about Alig's involvement in Angel's disappearance.
Yeah, so he starts hinting at it.
Right.
At first through those blind items in his column.
Mm-hmm.
But the pressure's building.
It is, and at the same time, the police are focused on Peter Gatien.
Alig's old boss.
Yeah, they want to get him for drug trafficking.
Right.
And they see Alig as a potential witness.
Interesting.
So they hold back on charging him with murder, hoping that he'll cooperate.
Wow. So they knew he was probably involved.
Yeah.
But his potential testimony against Gatien was more important to them.
Exactly. But the truth has a way of coming out.
It really does.
And a few months later, a group of kids are playing on Staten Island, and they make this horrific discovery.
Oh, no.
This box washes ashore, and it's got a legless torso inside.
Oh, my God.
It's Angel's body.
So that's when it all comes crashing down.
The case explodes, and the police can't ignore Alig anymore.
Well,
The walls are closing in, and Alig tries to run.
he does.
Flees New York, but they track him down and arrest him along with Riggs.
Wow.
And during the interrogation, Riggs confesses to the killing.
He does.
He claims that he hit Angel with a hammer in self-defense
Right.
after Angel attacked Alig.
Okay.
And then he goes on to describe, the dismemberment, the disposal of the body.
All the gruesome details.
Yeah, and Alig's version of events.
I bet it was different.
Oh, she says that he acted in self-defense and that it was Riggs who escalated the violence.
Of course.
He disputes some of the details in Riggs's confession
Okay.
and says they're exaggeration.
So it becomes this.
Yeah.
He said, she said.
Exactly. But the evidence is mounting,
Right.
and they're both facing a possible first-degree murder charge.
Yeah. So what do?
So they take a plea deal.
They go.
They plead guilty to manslaughter.
Wow.
And they're each sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison.
A dramatic fall from grace.
It is for the former king of the club kids.
Yeah, and the media just goes crazy.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Alig's story becomes this cautionary tale
Right.
about the excesses of the club scene,
Yeah, the dark side of it all.
the dark underbelly.
But, beneath the headlines,
Yeah.
it's a human tragedy.
It is. It really is,
Yeah.
a story that touched a lot of people.
Yeah, so Alig and Riggs are behind bars, and
Mm-hmm.
this whole chapter comes to a close. But, what was life like for Alig in prison?
Well, I imagine it was a pretty harsh reality check.
Yeah.
Gone were the flashing lights, the adoration of the club scene,
Right.
replaced with, the cold, hard walls of a prison cell. He was transferred between different prisons,
Yeah.
even spent some time in solitary confinement after he was caught using heroin.
Yeah, not surprising given his history with addiction, but even in prison, it seems
Well,
like he was looking for something, some sense of purpose. He starts writing his memoirs and he finds comfort in classic literature.
interesting. Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, kind of ironic given
Yeah.
the circumstances.
So, yeah, it is, right?
But it speaks to the complexity of human nature.
Yeah.
Even in the darkest places, people can find ways to reflect, to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So he manages to kick his drug habit in 2009, and then in 2014, after almost 2 decades behind bars, he's finally paroled.
Wow.
But can you imagine trying to re-enter society after all that time?
I mean, the world had completely changed, right?
The club scene was different, social media had exploded, and Ali was carrying all this baggage, the stigma of his crime.
Right. And that stigma, it follows you.
It does, but he still seemed determined to make a comeback.
He did.
He tries his hand at art, showcases his paintings and exhibitions, even considers a reality show.
The lure of the spotlight.
Yeah, he can't resist it, and he goes back to promoting parties.
Trying to recapture that old magic.
Exactly, but it seems like he's still battling his demons.
Well, addiction is a lifelong struggle, and it's hard to break those old habits, especially when you're facing all those challenges of reintegration.
Yeah, and tragically, Alig's struggle ends in 2020.
It does on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
He dies from a heroin overdose at the age of 54.
It's a heartbreaking end to a really turbulent life, and it sparked a lot of debate.
It did.
Was he a victim of his own creation? Was he a product of a culture that just celebrated excess and pushed boundaries too far? Or was he ultimately responsible for his own choices?
It's a tough question to answer. I mean,
Perfect.
there's no easy answer. It's a mix of individual choices, societal influences, personal struggles.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It is.
But I think we can all agree that Michael Alig's story is a cautionary tale.
It is.
It's a reminder that fame can be fleeting and dangerous, that the pursuit of validation through attention, it can have really dire consequences.
It's a story that really makes you think about your own values, your own choices.
Yeah, and it reminds us that even the most dazzling figures can be consumed by their own demons.
That's for sure.
Well, this deep dive into Michael Alig's world has taken us through the highs and the lows of his life, and the vibrant but often dangerous world of the club kids. It's a story that leaves us with more questions than answers, but it's a story that deserves to be told and remembered.
Absolutely.